With 16 months left before the 2020 presidential election, where do things stand for the Trump 2020 campaign? Alongside the U.S. economy and illegal immigration, what are the key campaign issues and challenges today? Through the eyes of Trump 2020 strategist Marc Lotter. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Today we sit down with the Director of Strategic Communications for the Trump 2020 campaign, Marc Lotter. Marc previously served as Special Assistant to President Trump and as Press Secretary to Vice President Mike Pence. We discuss important issues for the Trump 2020 campaign: the booming economy, the census controversy, the U.S. border crisis, China tariffs, the environment, President Trump's stance on Iran, and how the president has enacted many of his campaign promises. We also look at how the Democratic field of candidates have adopted increasingly socialist policies that would have, in Lotter's view, been unthinkable just a decade ago. Marc Lotter, wonderful to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
So, Marc, you're the Director of Strategic Communications for the Trump campaign. How about you give us an update of where things are right now?
Well, right now, the president's campaign is on a different timeline than that of our opponents. We're focused on one thing only, and that's the general election. So the entire team, the operation is building out to make sure that the president is reelected in the general election, while the other side is focusing on their primaries and their debates and things. We're focused on that singular goal. President's fundraising is record-setting. It's off the charts, and he's got a tremendous team that's being put in place, both at the grassroots level, but even at the campaign national level, to make sure that he has all the resources and expertise needed to be able to be reelected.
So listen, you've worked for both the vice president and the president in different capacities in the White House. What prompted you to shift into campaign mode here?
Well, it was really early. I was about the first year, a little short of the first year in the administration, and Hope Hicks, the communications director, Sarah Sanders, then the White House press secretary, came to me as the vice president's press secretary and asked if I would consider going to serve as a voice on the outside of the administration, because at that point the president needed as many voices on the outside as he could get to support the administration, to support his efforts, and help him on the political side. So it was an honor to be able to do that, and then transition that right directly to the campaign to make sure that his message is getting out there, because it's resonating with so many people. But you're not going to see it in the mainstream media. You're not going to see it in those traditional channels. So it falls to us and the folks that work in our department just to make sure that as many people out there, as many Americans get the message about the good things that are going on with the president.
So what are the key issues in your mind? What are the key topics?
Well, this won't be shocking. This is not shocking, but it's first and foremost, it's the economy. People historically have always voted with their pocketbooks. And when you look at what's going on in the economy right now, we just had another blockbuster jobs report out last Friday. 224,000 jobs were created, which just shattered expectations. But even more importantly, we saw another month where wages were growing 3% or more. That's people's paychecks. And while economists and people in DC like to talk about wages and all those, these are people's paychecks. And I saw that the average full-time worker in America right now is getting about an extra $900 a year. That's a raise. Because paychecks are growing, because taxes are going down. These are all things that they can put into their own family budgets, maybe saving for a child's college, paying off debt, or going on a vacation somewhere. These are all good things that can happen because of the strong economy with President Trump.
So what is it about the president's approach, in your view, that's actually created this boom? I think unarguable economic boom.
Well, I think the president he's coming at it as a businessman. He doesn't look at things through the lens of traditional politics. He looks at things for the results. And he's not necessarily concerned about always how we get there, but just getting there. And that's the key, because I think one of the untold stories of 2016 was that too many American people had been lied to for too long by presidents of both parties and by presidential candidates of both parties, when they would say for 25 plus years, we're going to fix NAFTA that is causing our jobs to be shifted overseas. We're going to address China and their unfair trade practices, which is again hurting American workers, or something as simple as even moving the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem,
right,
which was signed into law in the early 90s, and every president since then had said they were going to do it, and then they didn't. This was a president who campaigned, and people believed that if he said he was going to do something, he actually meant it. And what they're seeing is it's true. He actually is doing the things he said he was going to do, and I think the American people are rewarding him for that.
So, something that's been really big in the news recently is the census question. And I saw that the Attorney General has actually stepped up saying he thinks the Supreme Court decision was wrong, basically, that he agrees with the president. Tell me a little bit about the census.
Well, I think from a true standpoint, I mean, this is such a basic question. It's hard to understand why there's controversy. It's been in the census for 190 years, I believe, and it only came off in 2010 under President Obama. I mean, we ask people about their home ownership. We ask them about so many questions. Why wouldn't we want to know whether people are here in our country illegally, what their immigration status is? There is already federal law that prohibits the census information being used at a specific level where people could target individual people based on their answers. So this is just getting a count and trying to get a true idea. And the irony is that Congress has delegated through the Census Act the ability to administer the census to the executive branch. And so now they're doing it, and of course Congress doesn't like the results, so they're going to take these things to court. But interesting thing is that while Democrats are out there talking about free health insurance to every illegal immigrant, free colleges, free all these things, well, how would we even know how much that's going to cost if they don't even get an accurate count of those people? So in a way, they're just showing that they're opposed once again to anything that President Trump does, even if having that basic information is critical at so many different levels, even some of their harebrained ideas.
So, actually, speaking of healthcare, what does the campaign feel around the healthcare issue right now?
I think it's very important, and what we have seen is that while so many people believe the 2018 election was decided in many cases for Democrats based on the healthcare question, they've actually flipped the script and turned it completely around. Their plans right now, which would eliminate private employer-provided health insurance to 180 million Americans, 20 million American senior citizens who take Medicare Advantage plans, and kick them off, take it away from them against their will and replace it with a government-issued health care policy, is just not the way the American system works. I mean, I don't like going to the DMV and waiting in line to get my license renewed. I certainly don't want to sit in line at some bureaucracy waiting for some government employee to tell me when and what can be done with my health care.
So, with respect to the census, I think we're seeing data that's basically saying that most Americans are actually pro the census question. It seems paradoxical that there would be opposition to this.
Yeah, it really is. And that poll you recently showed that a majority of Americans support asking that question. And once again, we see that Democrats are on the wrong side of what people are actually telling us that they want. Whether it is health care, whether it is raising taxes, or even something as simple as that census question. The Democrats have gone so far afield, so far to the radical left. They've alienated so much of America. And this is a very common sense question, and it's a very common sense way to do it, is to say, are you here in the United States legally? What is your immigration status? And again, there are protections in place. This data cannot be used to target individual respondents and be used for immigration purposes. It's just to get an accurate count. I think I saw somewhere that said, that in some of the cases, the census asks you how many restrooms are in your home. We can ask that, but we can't actually ask if you're here in our country illegally. It's just nonsense.
So let's actually jump to this another key issue that we're looking at. It's the border, of course, right? There was, for a long time, we were hearing in the mainstream media, it's a manufactured crisis. There was a lot of coverage of this idea. We've had reporters at the border for months and months showing that there's nothing manufactured about this crisis, but it seems like the narrative has shifted significantly. And now it's, there's a massive crisis, except the Trump administration is responsible. Let's hear your thoughts.
Well, I think it is again, that hypocrisy that we have seen from liberals in the mainstream media, is that they denied there was a crisis, they called it a manufactured crisis, and then as soon as they could try to figure out a way to make it look badly on President Trump, then they finally admit there's a crisis, even though Democrats were putting up resistance to getting money to even help the people that they were complaining about. But we have to have an honest conversation with the American people about what's going on at the border. Our immigration laws are geared around a problem that was 20 or 30 years ago. It used to be that the primary people who were coming into our country illegally were single men, mostly from Mexico, and they were doing it for economic reasons. That's what our laws are designed to handle. If a single illegal migrant from Mexico comes across our border, we can literally apprehend them and ship them right back. No hearing, no process, no anything. They go back across the border. But when you're dealing with countries that are not contiguous to the United States, so like Central America, which is the problem we face right now, we don't have that ability. So not only do we have to detain them, we also, if they're making fake asylum claims, we have to adjudicate those claims. We have to hear those things. We're under court orders that says that we can only hold children for a certain period of time. You can't keep the children and the adults together because so many of the trafficking issues are coming into play. And we've seen so many problems. There's actually an industry right now called child recycling, where the cartels will provide a migrant who's willing to pay a child to bring across the border, basically to use as a passport, to get free access into the country, and you can stay pretty much as long as you want. And they take the child and they send them back to the other side, and they wait and pick up another family or another person later on. These are the kinds of things the president wants to stop, but our laws don't let us do it. And so while we do need to address the humanitarian crisis at the border, we also have to, and the president has called for Congress, to change the laws that provide the incentive that says that if you can pick up a child or bring a child, you basically get free entry into the United States, hardly any questions asked. These are the things that we've got to actually do to stop putting a Band-Aid on the issue and actually get to the underlying cause of it.
So, you were talking a little bit about the President Trump's unorthodox methods, and one of those seems to be with, creating an arrangement with the Mexican government to basically reduce movement across the border. And now we're seeing that this has actually had some kind of an impact.
It's amazing. And two things. One, it's thankfully that the president was able to reach this agreement with Mexico. We actually saw a decline of over 37,000, I think 500 migrants last month. 37,500 fewer people came across the border illegally. But it also should tell people something at home. What does it say when Mexico is actually doing more to secure our border than Democrats in Congress? And people should be outraged by that they're actually having to take these steps. They're spending millions of dollars. They're sending 20,000 troops to their borders and patrolling the transit lanes in between, trying to stop these groups and caravans of people coming into our country. And you should be outraged that your own members of Congress, individual members of Congress, are doing less to protect your neighborhoods, to stop the flow of drugs and crime and sex trafficking and child trafficking than the Mexican government is.
So why do you think the Democrats are generally, seemingly, opposed to enacting these laws?
Well, I have to think that they're making this as a political calculation, because you don't have to go back that far in history to see that Democrats actually supported strong immigration. I remember President Obama in 2014 telling people in Central America not to come up here, not to bring your children or send your children, because it's a dangerous journey, and if you make it, we will send you back. I remember him referring to it as a humanitarian crisis, and saying that escaping poverty is not a reason for asylum. You go back previous years, you had Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, I think even Hillary Clinton voted to provide funding for a wall, voted for funding to increase border security and barriers. And now all of a sudden they've made this calculated step to just go so far to the radical extreme left, they're actually calling for open borders. They want to decriminalize illegal border crossing. And you have to ask yourself, if these migrants are sending their children unaccompanied by themselves or coming up as a family unit, making a 1,000-mile journey where 30% of the women are sexually assaulted, and I believe 2/3 are experiencing physical violence of some sort. If you're willing to do that, if you're willing to pay thousands of dollars to the cartels, the coyotes, and the smugglers, when you don't make a lot of money, that's a lot of money down there. If you're willing to pay thousands of dollars, do you honestly think a parking ticket is going to actually serve as a deterrent? No, it's not. And so it is a license for open borders. And even President Obama's former Homeland Security Secretary last week called it the wrong policy and saying it was equal to open borders and wrong for our country.
So, it's interesting that you mentioned this kind of shift towards what you call the radical left. Certainly, we've seen a number of Democratic presidential candidates. We talk about things, that look very close to open borders and so forth in the debates. This is one of the theories I've heard, right? That basically there's Nancy Pelosi, of course, leading the Democrats in the House, that somehow this Democratic socialist, I don't know if you call it a caucus, but group is somehow, forcing an agenda on the rest of the Democrats. How do you see that?
Well, I think they're definitely having an impact, and when you see it, whether it is on social media, whether you see it in the protests in the streets, right. The entire resistance movement that has started pretty much since the president was elected, and now you see the policies that match that. I mean, the energy of the Democrat Party is clearly with the radical progressive left. The policies that they are espousing are going that. And just to make sure that we make this clear, there is no moderate lane for any candidate on the Democrat side to come up through that presidential primary. You even have Joe Biden, who's trying to say that he is a moderate, going out there and flip-flopping on 40 years of public support and statements on taxpayer-funded abortion. He's now taken 4 different positions on it, or flip-flopped 4 different times in the last month or two, trying to appease this radical base. You had people who long supported having tough immigration stands, now supporting open borders. I remember President Obama, when in his State of the Union, talked about how Obamacare wasn't going to provide free health insurance to illegal immigrants. Now, every hand raised in that Democrat debate saying they would provide free government taxpayer-funded health insurance to people who are in our country illegally. They are correcting or not reading the tea leaves from the 2016 election wrong, and they're doing so by saying that there's no way a moderate can actually come up and get this nomination. You have to have endorsed the Green New Deal. You have to support things that are going to take jobs away from Americans in order to qualify for their nomination. So we'll see, but whoever survives will get President Trump, and we'll make sure that the people understand the choice that they face.
Well, and I've heard argued a number of times, actually, that the primary may look like this, but then the actual candidate on the Democratic side may pull back from some of these more radical positions. Have you heard that?
Well, that's a typical historical norm in presidential politics, or I would say really just politics almost at any level. That you would definitely drift out further toward the edges on your policy beliefs during a primary, and come back to try to get the middle in a general election. The one thing though that people are discounting in that theory, and that's true throughout history. But this isn't history, this is now.
Okay.
And that in an era of social media, in an era where every single thing that you have said through that primary can be instantly recalled, instantly resent, instantly redistributed.
Right.
And you also have a party, especially on the Democrat side, that is showing no willingness for people to try to have it both ways. They expect you to actually endorse and support these ideas. So, we're not going to allow the Democrats to forget their policy positions and suddenly come back to a middle ground in a general election against the president. But even more so, I don't think their own voters will do that. Their own voters are demanding these purity tests. And how are they going to feel that if their eventual nominee told them one thing when they wanted their vote in a primary and says something completely different in their general election? It just doesn't match up with where the Democrat Party is right now.
Very interesting. So, the president has said, unequivocally on a number of occasions, America will never become a socialist country, and, basically taking that strong position. How is that working for the campaign in your view?
Well, I think it's a very strong statement, but it also reflects the reality of what our opponents are talking about. I don't remember a time when you had the leading candidates for a major political party's nomination saying they wanted to eliminate private health insurance. Think about all the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that work for Blue Cross Blue Shield or Aetna or United Healthcare, right, or some of the other major insurance providers. Suddenly their companies are going to be put out of business. Are they going to go on the government payroll? How is that all going to work? Think about what it's going to happen when you basically nationalize an entire industry. This is the same party that also said, though, that we really don't care about coal miners. We're just going to put them out of business. Or people who drill for oil or natural gas because they don't want us to be energy independent. These are some of the policies that they are openly espousing, to the point where one of their candidates is talking about giving everybody $1,000 a month for simply living. You have other ones that are talking out there about, and part of their Green New Deal is to pay people who don't want to work. I mean, where in the American dream is that part of,
Right.
of taxpayers now being forced to have money removed from their pockets and redistributed to somebody else who doesn't want to work? That pretty clearly falls on that socialism policy, that socialism line, to the point you even have, obviously, candidates who are now embracing the term socialism and self-identifying themselves as socialists.
That it just actually reminds me of something. I saw a report recently how basically the $15 minimum wage is expected to basically hurt jobs prospects in the country, which almost seems counterintuitive. But what's your take?
Well, I think it was a Congressional Budget Office report,
Right.
which the Democrats love to attack President Trump when something from the CBO doesn't work out the way he wants it to. But now they're trying to run and hide from this report, which said that up to 3.7 million jobs would be eliminated under a $15 an hour minimum wage. And it also goes on to calculate further problems that you're going to increase the price for everyone, because someone's going to have to pay for these higher wages.
Right.
You're going to reduce jobs. We have already seen so many places. Take a look at McDonald's, which is replacing people taking your order with digital kiosks. And so we're seeing it over and over again, that these jobs, and then let's also talk about what this actually will do. It will hurt the people who are just coming into the job market. So many people, myself included, my first job was bagging groceries at a grocery store, where I made minimum wage, maybe a little bit above minimum wage. That's what the kids in high school were getting their first experience at the movie theater, at the fast food place. Well, if you're going to price them out of work, they're going to reduce their jobs. That's going to hurt their career impacts. It's going to have long-term impacts in terms of their ability to go out and successfully perform in the workforce later in life. And while President Trump has created more than 6 million jobs in his 2.5 years since his election, again, that choice we're going to have to make. 6 million jobs created, or their plans which will cost us nearly 4 million jobs. I think it's a pretty easy choice for America.
So, record fundraising, I've been following that a bit. A lot of the president's positions are things that, it seems, at least based on the polls, are things that the American people want. These are definitely, in favor of the campaign. What are some of the challenges that you see the campaign facing?
Well, I'm not sure I would list it as a challenge, but anytime that you're dealing with an elected official, especially at the executive level, whether it's a mayor, a governor, or president of the United States, and they're running for re-election, you always have real world consequences of things that we don't even know about that can always come into play. Because we have to remember, and one of the things that we are always very good at remembering, is that even though we work for the president's campaign, he's always the president.
Okay.
And so you don't know what the needs of world events are going to be. You don't know things that we can't possibly predict. And when the world calls, he will still be the president of the United States. And so those are the things that you always have to think about, but you can't really prepare for. That's why when you look at the fundamentals, whether it's the economy, when you look at the things that the president is doing to combat China and their unfair trade practices, or finally dealing with the challenges of North Korea and Iran and their destabilizing activities, you lay the foundation for success. You lay and show American greatness, American strength abroad. And you can't control what you can't control, but other than that, I think that the foundation is there. The president is doing remarkably great with all of those basic things that the Americans expect of our presidents, and that's why I'm very confident he'll be reelected.
So actually, let's speak about the China tariffs and the whole approach to China, which at the Epoch Times, we've been watching this for years, and this, it's basically a 180-degree shift from the past decades of policies, I would argue, anyhow. How do you think, but some of these things also create some challenges, for example, for farmers, like I think soybean farmers was one example and so forth. How do you think these tariff realities and the lack of clarity around whether there will be a deal or not, or even whether there should be, perhaps, how do you think that'll impact?
Well, I think the one thing we have on our side is that the American people know that we've been taken advantage of for a very long time. And even for politicians, primarily Republicans, who had long been supportive of free trade, they now understand that we never really had free trade to begin with. We were sold a false bill of goods because we had unfair trade practices, unfair tariffs, and things that were really putting us at a disadvantage, and that's what the president is confronting. I often compare it to road construction.
Okay.
In that people don't like it when we have to shift lanes around or maybe close a lane or two on the highway while we get ready to make a larger, smoother, better, bigger highway. And there's some bumps in those roads. There might be a little hiccup here and there in the beginning, but then the traffic patterns smooth themselves out. And once we get through that and people get on those brand new lanes and the wider new lanes and the new bridges and highways, they actually see that little bit of trouble that they had to face was actually worth it all because it's such smooth sailing on the backside. And so I think, especially when it comes to America's farmers, they understand that. They know that they have been at a disadvantage. They were some of the biggest champions of, say, renegotiating NAFTA. And once we get the new USMCA through Congress, they will be the ones to benefit, along with manufacturers who also know about what's going on with China. So they recognize it. They also see that we finally have a president who's willing to fight for them, and not just say that they're going to do it, that actually follow up to do it. And so I think the president gets a lot of credit for that. And if we're able to make a good deal, a fair deal for both sides, and the president will do it. If not, we'll continue to put pressure on them to come to the table and treat us in a mutually respectable way. And until then, the tariffs and things like that will remain in place because what we're seeing, and this is very important, these tariffs are having negligible impact on Americans. Okay. We have seen inflation is fully in check. We've seen also a lot of American companies who are saying they're Chinese suppliers, they're forcing them to lower prices. They're finding new avenues and new places to go get their supplies or their products or the components for them. And so, as the president has said, is that China's economy is the one that's paying for this because they're forced to lower their prices, or they're forced to increase their state subsidies for these industries, or they're forced to devalue and manipulate their currency to try to offset these. But the end result is that, again, prices, inflation, very much in check. Wages are still growing faster than inflation. So the American economy is continuing to be strong, and Americans aren't really feeling much of an impact of this at all.
So let's talk about something that the president has kind of attacked on a lot, which is environmental issues. He recently actually did a speech on it, and again was attacked quite a bit by presumably, proponents of environmental causes. I've seen that a number of the Democratic presidential candidates, the environmental issues are the centerpiece of their platforms, or so it would appear. How is that impacting the campaign?
Well, I think the one thing that the president has shown through his leadership, he mentioned that in the speech, is that we can be good stewards of our environment and have a strong economy. It doesn't have to be an either-or choice, which is what the Democrats, the liberals, and some of their progressive groups believe, is that you have to sanction, punish industry in order to save the environment. And the president says we can do both at the same time. If you actually look at the statistics, our air is the cleanest it's been in 75 years. Our water is cleaner now than at any point than when the EPA started monitoring it, I think back in the 1970s. So we can do the things that are necessary. We are still the global leader in reducing carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, regardless of whether we're in some meaningless Paris Climate Accord, which basically punished American industry while allowing the largest polluters in the world, meaning China, India, and Russia, to basically get off scot-free. They were able to continue polluting, continue to grow their economy, while it was American companies, American workers, and American taxpayers that were going to have to be forced to offset these costs while the other ones were getting away with it with basically no penalties whatsoever. The president showed that we can do it. American ingenuity is still showing that we can do it. American consumers who are demanding things that are more friendly to the environment, that offset their impact, well, companies are responding. It didn't take a government mandate to do it. Consumer sentiment and American ingenuity proved that we can do all of these things without having the foot of government on companies' throats forcing them to do it. And the results are proving the president right.
The candidate Trump, back in 2015, one of his campaign promises, he's going to take America out of the Iran deal. And if he did, as you mentioned, he's enacted a great number of his campaign promises. And I think the American people were supportive of that. Today we're hearing that Iran is exceeding its enrichment or increasing its enrichment again to potentially dangerous levels. How is that going to impact the campaign?
Well, I'm not sure if it'll impact the campaign. The president obviously delivered on his promise to do that, and he's keeping the maximum security pressure on Iran. We've got to remember that the flawed Iran deal that was negotiated by Obama and Biden basically called for a temporary pause on their nuclear development, which was going to expire in a few years from now. Meanwhile, they were giving pallets full of cash to the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. They were not doing anything to counteract the Iranian ballistic missile technology, which not only threatened Israel, it threatened other people and other allies in the region. And that shows you why it was such a flawed deal that they have so quickly just turned on. It's like, well, we're still going to do it. It's a shame that Europe and our allies in Europe decided to turn a blind eye to that aggression. This is a president who said, well, fine, if we have to go it alone, we will go it alone. And now, again, we are seeing the results of that. Iran's economy is on the verge of collapse. And that's why they are putting so much pressure on Europe, trying to salvage, because they need the assistance. If Europe would hold firm with the United States, we would see some pretty quick action that would bring Iran to the table to stop their support of terrorism, stop the threat they pose to Israel and others in the region. And I think we're starting to see that the Europeans understand why the president was right when he made that call, and what a bad, horrible Iran deal that Obama and Biden gave us.
So, Mark, we're going to have to wrap up in a moment, but I wanted to kind of get a sense of some of the new initiatives the campaign is putting together. I saw a tweet from you today, actually, about an event happening in Pennsylvania. Lara Trump is going to be launching Women for Trump. Tell me a bit more.
So right now, one of the things that we're doing in the campaign is we're building out those coalitions, those groups of people who are going to help support President Trump and put him over the top for re-election in 2020. Last week or 2 weeks ago, I believe, we launched Latinos for Trump down in Miami, Florida with the Vice President. And next week, Lara Trump and some other special guests are going to be launching the Women for Trump initiative. And this is one of the things that so many in the mainstream media get wrong. The president's support is so broad. It's historically high among Latinos. It's also very strong among women. And they see the direct results of the president's leadership, whether it's the lowest unemployment rate in 65 years, whether it's wages going up. 3.1 million jobs have been filled by women, new jobs under the president's leadership. But you also see things like doubling of the child tax credit, or taking a strong stand on the border, because that's the #1 area where deadly opioids and other drugs are flooding in and poisoning our neighborhoods, killing our children. Things that are truly important to so many women across America. It's a great opportunity for them to come together, show their support for the president. And I can tell you there will be many other initiatives and other coalitions out there launched in the months to come.
And just a little question associated with this. I think one of the challenges in 2018 that the president had was around, I think, suburban women, right, in particular. How is the campaign going to try to reach those folks?
Well, I think something like Women for Trump is one of those key areas. But it's also, I think, one of the things we have got to understand is that the results matter. And despite what Democrats are trying to tell people to ignore what they see with their own eyes, They see help wanted signs going up all over the place. They see people being able to get jobs, including women. They see Ivanka Trump and her tremendous leadership from inside the White House leading a global initiative to raise female empowerment, not only here in our country, and getting companies to sign on to job training and opportunities to grow women in the workforce, but she's also taking that as a global initiative.
Right.
Traveling down to Africa, talking about removing the barriers to education and to ownership and to participation, not only on the economic side, but also in the political side. So they see this administration fighting for women. And I think regardless of what the rhetoric is coming from the other side, the facts do matter. And I think people see that.
Marc Lotter, excellent to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.